Hello. Gonna say that again. Hello. All right. Welcome to real world Kotlin-Powered Android. I don't know what I was thinking when I picked that title because it's really hard to say 3 times fast. But anyway, my name is James Williams. I work at Udacity. I am a curriculum lead there for Android. And basically what that means is my job is to learn, to keep my finger on the pulse of what's happening, especially in Android, to try and teach it to our students. And I see a couple of our students here in the crowd. And I apologize for this. I have to do this plug, or I can't come. At Udacity, we have a bunch of programs called nanodegrees, which are a series of courses with projects that students can take to learn things like Android and iOS and data analysis and things like that. One of the awesome sides of our Android program specifically is all of our courses are available free on the internet. So you won't get project reviews, but you can take courses that, for example, a material design course that I made with Roman Nurek and Nick Butcher, you can take that all for free. So if you want more information about our courses or our nanodegrees, go to go.udacity.com Android. All right, now that that's over, basically this talk is one of the things that I didn't like when I was starting to learn Kotlin was there was a lot of just toy apps and not things that people were actually running. So this talk takes an app and converts it and takes you through my process, takes you through the story of converting it from Java to Kotlin. Yeah, there we go. What is Kotlin? You're at KotlinConf, so you probably know what Kotlin is. But for the people on the video, hey, it's a statically typed programming language. It's 100% compatible with Java, and it has really awesome tooling support. And that's all I'm going to say on that. Check out kotlinland.org or other talks from KotlinConf 2017. So the app that I used, and can I walk or, cool, because I want to give these people some love. So the app that I used is an app from our Android nanodegree program, a former app called Stockhawk. And in that app, students have a stock application, hence the name Stockhawk, that they take and add some features to add charting of previous stocks and things like that. And this is what it looks like, when they first use it. So it's not that complex, but having a 2-screen app is definitely not like a hello world, so to speak. So the first thing I did, of course, is to add Kotlin support to Stockhawk with that bit of code there, and that bit of code there to my inner and outer build.gradle files. So my first thing that I did wrong was I mass converted to Kotlin. And the problem with that is it introduces a lot of weird and funky operators and things like that. So I want another point of crowd participation. Repeat after me. Don't mass convert to Kotlin. Repeat after me. Instead, convert and tweak individually. Okay, that kind of sucked, but it's okay. I still love you. So yeah, and in this really isn't like a Kotlin-only thing. You really shouldn't, for any new programming language, just trust whatever the compiler does for you, because you might have problems with that. So one of the first things I start with is in the app, there is a quote intent service that gets the stock quotes from, used to be Yahoo, and now it's, I think it's Quandor or something like that. So this is how that code looks in Java. And here's how the Kotlin code looks. And what I really liked about this was it let me cut out my constructor method that all it was doing was just calling out to the super because, as you probably know, Kotlin has, when you do an extend or extending a class, you need to specify what the constructor that you're using for the class that it is being extended from. Another thing that I liked was that I didn't have to think about if the thing that I was extending or implementing if it was a class or if it was an interface. Because I don't know about you, but this was a problem a lot in my Java code where things get refactored and then some things become classes or interfaces and vice versa, and it gives you compiler errors. I keep on bumping into the light back here. Sorry. So yeah, so that was that was a nice part. Another thing that you guys probably know from other talks here is that the format for a function is slightly different, where it starts with the fun keyword and the types go after the actual variable name. So here's a little bit of a more advanced class for my job, my quote job service. And for this one, the main thing that this is just showing is the return types after the actual value. And I'm going to skip that one. All right, so the first major thing that I did was updating the data model. So it originally used a traditional Android contract SQLite implementation, and I changed that to use RMLite, mainly because it's close to Room. And when I was first converting this app, Room had some issues with Kotlin. They might be resolved by now, but that's why it's using RMLite. And in that, I ended up using a lot of data classes instead of Java POJOs. And we've probably all made Java POJO classes. And even if you have the help of the compiler to generate your getters and setters and all that stuff, it's a lot of code. And data classes help us with that and make really concise code. So here is my stock RM data class. And it has the annotations in there for RMLite, which are very similar to what it would look like for Roam. And this was kind of my second aha moment where it surprised me that I could just use the annotations because I'd been used to using languages like Groovy where you might have to do some weird movement around or changing interfaces and things like that. So let's look at a slightly more concise representation of this data class. What this data class allows me to do is, in Java, I would have 3 and 4 constructors for just the symbol, just the price, just the change, percent change. This allows me to satisfy that with just one constructor. So I can have all of these different parameters from different instantiations from this type. The next thing that I worked on was the stock DAO object. And excuse this for being bad code, because this is how a lot of my code looked when I started using Kotlin. I was really scared of the val keyword and the immutability. So to get around the scary question mark that it puts after your types, I was like, I'll just make everything late init. And that's kind of bad. But it's bad for 2 reasons. The first reason is it's a cop-out. Like, you should make things immutable when you can. The second reason is it's separating code, because in this code right here, I'm using a init to be the body of my constructor. I don't need that. I can satisfy that just by putting that into the declaration and make those val. So another major point that that was helpful from switching from Java to Kotlin was in the space of collections. So what I used a lot of times, because I come from Groovy, I would use Guava to give me kind of the, the collection interfaces and filtering and things like that. Kotlin has it built into the library, which I really appreciate. So it gives you all of these types. One of the weird things from Kotlin that I didn't specifically like is there isn't a specific array type. You have to do array of, list of, array list of, that sort of thing. So it's a bit of a disconnect in when I was moving my code over. But the thing that I really enjoyed was all of the collection manipulation that I could use, especially when it comes to DAO objects, because you can do interesting filtering on find by ID, during a certain interval and things like that. So that really was helpful to me when moving over this app to Kotlin. So here's just a quick example of that, where I have two functions, actually one function. The first one just gets my IDs by using a map and has a closure lambda in there. And then the second one for the recent items shows kind of an advanced example where I'm sorting by the date and I'm getting the last 30 items. And this is actually what I use to do my stock charting for my stock. So find view by ID is something. How many here are Android developers? Everyone, sweet. So you know my pain. So in Java, I would just use Butternut for everything. And this was a place where it's kind of a decision point of what you want to do. So one thing that you could do is use Kotlin, which is written by Jake Wharton, who's here or in somewhere around, who writes all the things. This was kind of a first step for me, just because it felt safe and it was easier to explain to people, oh, we were using this thing, and we replaced it with this thing that's very similar. So you can add it with that code there. And here's my, just the basic butter knife code. And that changes into this counter knife code. So what's happening there is it's actually using delegation because there's a function that's called bind view. And the by keyword delegates the instantiation, the assignment of, in this case, recycler view, stack recycler view, and error to that bind view, and then it actually does the assignment. And I just explained that. Another thing that you can do is, still in the place of delegation, is doing lazy delegation, where with the by lazy keywords, you delay the actual instantiation of that object until the first time it's run. This has been something that I haven't really found a good use for in my Android code specifically for just regular day-to-day apps, but I'm sure I'll find something for that. So the other thing that you can do is the Kotlin Android extensions. Now this is, and you can add it with that code. This is a bit more magical, and I kind of resisted adding this at first just because it seemed very weird, and I didn't know what was going on, because to have this layout code where the ID is symbol, and then I can reference it in my activity code with this. Now that top line up there, import Kotlin Next Android Synthetic. The next is a flavor. For most of your apps, it's going to be a basic app, is going to be main, but you might have a free flavor and a paid flavor. I know there's some requirements with making flavors in the new version of Android Studio. Then the activity name, and then the star to import all. And you can reference anything that's in your XML by its ID in your actual activity. So after kind of going through Android Studio and decompiling things and such, I've come around to liking this as a method. And probably in my new stuff, I will use this instead of counter knife or a butter knife. Excuse me. Another thing that I really liked was also from the JetBrains team called Onco. Now there's a couple of different parts of Onco. The first one that I'm going to talk about that I really, really like is Onco Commons, and you can edit with that. And this is what your intent will look like if you convert it straight from Java to Kotlin. This is good, but we can do better. We can cut it down to just one line of code, thanks to Onco Commons. And one of the cool things that it's doing here is for the put extra, that is using the pair object. And pair has a pair tuple rather has puts a function on every single object called to, so you can do sort of an implicit mapping of stock to symbol, and it will make that a pair. And with a series of pairs, you can actually coerce that into a map or hash map and things like that. So it makes it where it's a bit more readable than just having stock comma symbol like this. But you know, that's a debatable thing. Here are the other intent helpers that it exposes to you. The ones that I use a lot are mainly browse and email, but you have these other guys here. The next thing that I use a lot is Onco Logger, and you've probably seen this in a couple of the other slides before. This is another place where it's sort of a decision point of what you want to use, because the Kotlin code doesn't save you as much, especially if you're using something like Timber. And Onco Logger is slightly more verbose. One of the advantages of using Onco Logger over android.util.log is that you don't have to do the typical final static string tag equals whatever my long class name is, .get simple name. It exposes that for you. But on the other hand, Timber does that as well. So this is a place where it's kind of been debatable on when I've been talking to other content developers on the team about which thing we want to standardize on and use and be awesome with. This is another point where I felt like I just fell in love with Kotlin. Here's a typical Java singleton that we've probably all written or had the ID write for us. And that same singleton boils down to this one line of code. In my specific app, I used it for the quote data service, which does a bunch of functions for getting the quotes, processing a stock from the JSON that's returned, and things like that. And what I really liked is the object keyword in Complan allows you to mimic a singleton and make it where that thing cannot be instantiated. And it caused me to go through my code and think about what things here can be objects. And you know, what should be object, what shouldn't be an object. And the other thing that I really like about objects is that they can extend from classes and interfaces. So it just doesn't limit you in any way. Lambdas. This was another place that was really good, mainly because this is code from my app with the nice anonymous inner class. And if you're using something like retro lambda or the Java 8 support that was in Android, you can use Java 8 style Lambdas. But one of the things that I really liked from Kotlin was something I missed from Groovy, was that if you have a closure Lambda runnable bit of code that fits a certain interface, Kotlin will coerce that into that interface type. So this is the equivalent to this code right here, because it's implementing a runnable piece of code that has a dialog and an ID that gets coerced into dialog interface on click listener. Excuse me. So, like I said before, this is what's happening in the background. This is the interface from the source code that it's being converted into, because it's a single abstract method interface that has only a single method to implement. And yeah, and this is the signature from Android of that code that I just showed you. This is a slightly more verbose way to do it. This is mainly for cases where Kotlin doesn't know what the specific object type is. You can directly tell it, I want a dialog interface on click listener or whatever listener, passing your closure, and it will convert it for you. But for this previous example, because the signature already says it's a dialog interface, I don't need to have that, that declaration at the front, because it knows that it knows what the signature is, so it just makes it happen. This is another thing, the Wif keyword. This is something that is in a couple of languages. I know Groovy is one of them. Kotlin has it now. It allows you to simulate the builder pattern. So here is here's my service from my Stockhawk app, and it's using the builder pattern, so I can just use the dots and all that stuff. But what if I had an object that doesn't implement the builder pattern, and each of these are separate functions? Well, with Kotlin and the Wif keyword, I can treat it as the same thing. So this was another place where I made it uniform with whether I was dealing with a builder pattern or not a builder pattern. I would use the Wif keyword and the curly braces around it to kind of show people what is specifically happening. But this isn't a required thing, but it's something that I specifically like to do. Null Ability is probably something that we've all talked about at this conference. Specifically, I've sat in a couple of talks, and this is something that was kind of beat into me about the Nullable Types. So excuse me, I'm about to do it to you again, because I think this is really important, especially in Android. When you're converting your code over, this is what it's going to convert it into for the most part. It's going to put the question mark after something to say that it can be null or that value. And then for each of the declarations, it's either going to do the safe null check or the I don't care if you throw a null pointer exception check. This is one of the parts that is a bit disconcerting about converting all of your code over to Kotlin at the same time, all of your files, because it throws in all those null pointer checks, and you can miss some or do something funky and weird. So that's just another reason to be thinking about, do I need this thing to be null? Some of the ways that you can avoid needing something to be null is using late initialization. You can use delegation as well. But unless you are interfacing with a Java library or something, I haven't really found anything in Android apps that had to be null, unless there was an interface that said from some Java app that that threw some error. Some of the ways that I've avoided things being null is if I have an interface that was returning like a list of stocks, and the original interface could be null. I would change that to be something like, instead of returning null, it returns an empty list. So that way, I'm changing my behavior from having to handle this null to, is this list empty or not? And there are actually functions in the Kotlin language to handle is empty or is not empty and things like that. And I already said my tips. OK. So this is my first tip, is to embrace the Bao keyword because it's awesome, and immutability is awesome, and yeah. Does anybody disagree with that? Good. Like I was going on before, make your nullables a last-ditch option. Beware this double exclamation point conversion operator. And lambdas are your friends, especially with your anonymous inner classes. So I'm not quite done. I got a little bit more, so don't all run out. These are Kotlin resources that I think are really awesome. Antonio Oliva's book, I hope I'm saying his last name right, takes the app from our developing Android apps course and builds it in Kotlin little by little. So it uses our Sunshine app. So I really think that that's a good book to look at if you have already gone through our Android course or are going through our Android course and you want to learn Kotlin as you're learning the Android. You can kind of look at both at the same time. One thing that I want to mention, Aaron, are you in here anywhere? Yeah, he's there. OK, so we are working on a Kotlin course. Aaron is our gracious SME for the course. He works at Capital One. They have a booth upstairs. Yes? Yeah. So it's coming soon. Don't have a date, but it's coming soon. There is also our engineering team, our mobile engineering team, just published a blog post at engineering.udacity.com about their trials and tribulations of moving over to Kotlin and the things that they dealt with. Some of the major highlights are if someone's updating something, if it's more than a couple lines of code, they have a discussion of, should we rewrite this in Kotlin? And all new work that's going into the app is actually going to be in Kotlin. So keep on bumping into things, sorry. So those are resources that are coming in the soon time. Soon time, that's not a word, but it's going to be a word now. And I just said that. I'm open for questions. We have like 15 minutes, so fire away. Yep.
So dealing with nullability in activities, you don't have an access structure, and then so I'm thinking lazy delegates are a way to keep nullability. Do you have any other suggestions? Also, when you're using daggers to inject things that don't want to be nullable.
OK. The question was about ways to avoid null, and that one way you were doing was with lazy delegation. And do you have any other tips as far as like using Dagger and things like that? No, I think that's pretty much the way that we've been doing it. We aren't currently teaching Dagger yet, so I haven't dug into the internals of that specifically. But yeah. Anyone else? Yep.
Especially on lower-end Android devices, have you seen any performance
The question was, have I seen any problems with performance in devices? Lower in devices. What was the last part?
Yeah, largely, I suspect a lot of that might come from using the lambdas
Yeah.
or class functions, not
So I kind of operate from the easy point of targeting like 21 and up. So we don't have to target the lower devices. We actually just took that out of our content because we used to go back to as low as like gingerbread or something, whatever API level 10 was. So not yet. But yeah, I'm a little bit in green field with that because I can just make it whatever. Anyone else? Yep.
about changing from singleton to an object. What if I needed to do some init task for instantiating a singleton? In the case of singleton itself, I just declaring some constructor or init and doing some job, some initialization. But in the case of object,
Okay. So the question was, when changing over from a singleton to an object, how do you deal with any type of initialization that you would have originally done in the constructor function of an object of a singleton? How would you do that in an object? So it kind of depends. So if it's not a really complex object, so for instance, that quotes data service, what I did with that one was I would just have whatever I needed as like individual properties. Of course, that gets weird if you're doing something like you need a context reference or things like that. Some of the ways that we've been playing around with doing it is to either, if it's a simple object that doesn't have the weird implications of activities and context and stuff, we just pass it in. Or for that specific function, we would make the context or whatever that object is just a parameter and pass it in each time. It's a little bit messier, but like it makes sure that you have a fresh one and it's not stale and all that other weird stuff. So, yep. Anyone else?
Have you benchmarked any network improvement in your apps by using Kotlin?
Question was, have I benchmarked any network performance in apps using Kotlin? No, we haven't currently, but that is a good question. I should think about that because we have like some sort of old Android performance content around that we should think about. But thank you for that. Anyone else? Yes.
were any libraries particularly difficult to convert over with the shift over?
Okay, question was, were any libraries specifically difficult to convert with the shift over? No, there was, not in this specific app. One of the things that was a little bit interesting in another app that I did was working with the camera, and all of the media interface stuff was really funky and weird. I'm not sure if it's just because it's really funky and weird already, or that it was really funky and weird using in Complan, but that was something that was just odd to me. Yeah.
What kind of libraries did you use for that?
For this question was what libraries did I use? For this specific application, it was OpenCSV. It was a charting library that I forget what the name of it was. And that was pretty much it, other than like Butterknife, Cutterknife, Kotlin standard library. And yeah. Cool. Yes? Question was, do I recommend dropping APT and moving straight to KAPT? I don't really have an opinion. Yeah, I just, yep. Anyone else? Oh, I did something. Oh, that's what I did. Move that all the way to the end. Okay. Well, I thank you all kindly for coming. And I went a little bit country there, but it's okay. Thanks for coming. Have a good rest of the day.